Hello and welcome to Catholic Wisdom. Today I'm launching a new series on this new channel. The series is going to be called Searching and Finding. And every weekend I'm going to publish a conversation with somebody who is a faithful person or not a faithful person who is going to share with us their spiritual journey, what that has meant for them in their life, how it developed in their life, and where they have arrived by searching. Have they found something or have they not found something? In most cases, I have to say, it's going to be people coming from a Christian tradition. So Protestant Christians, Catholics, or Orthodox Christians. But I also want to add the witness of people who have not been able to find something that is satisfying for them existentially as of yet. So I hope this series is going to be as useful as possible as a way to compare and contrast our lives, our own experiences. And so thank you for your interest. And I now give to you my interview with my very good friend, Jordan Parsons. Hello, everyone. And hey, Jordan, so happy to have you as the number one guest on this new series, new channel, new everything. And for whoever is listening, for whoever is watching, this is the first episode of this series, we want to call it, that we would like to do every week on this particular channel, Catholic Wisdom, where I will be doing some mini interview some people, friends of mine or not, about specifically their spiritual journey. Without diving too much into personal details or colors, but panoramic on their spiritual journey so far, of course, and share with me and with the viewers what that experience has been, and the different colors that we can find in all the people that I'm going to be able to reach out to. So, Jordan, welcome.
Thank you. Very honored to be your first ever guest on this channel.
And should we start from who is Jordan Parsons? We've known each other for now more than 2 years. We've met in person as well, in your turf, let's say, and so we become friends mainly through BookTube and our love for books. But it would be nice to have a very quick, tagline introduction from you.
Sure, yeah. I don't have that interesting of a life, but yeah, I mean, I used to have a BookTube channel and it's not really active anymore. I live in Portland and I am a recent convert to Orthodox Christianity.
I think the next spontaneous question would be, how would you describe, if you had, in very kind of quick, maybe snapshots or milestones, your spiritual journey so far in your life so far that led you to where you are today with the Christian Orthodox Church?
Sure, yeah. I think the key phrase there is so far, right? So it's going to be difficult for me to give a super coherent account because I do still consider myself in the thick of it. You know what I mean? It's an ongoing process, and I think it will remain that way. But thus far, if I had to kind of sum it up, I guess I would say, I started out. I did not grow up in a religious household at all. Kind of casually Protestant, I suppose. We went to church maybe on Christmas to some kind of Protestant service, non-denominational. And then, the typical thing in my high school years, I became pretty jaded about religion. I became very fond of thinking of myself as very superior to that kind of, weak-minded approach to life. Like, I thought of it as something that people go to purely for refuge and purely to kind of comfort themselves about the difficulties of the world. I wouldn't say that I was ever actively an atheist, but certainly I was an atheist-leaning agnostic for much of my adult life. And that went on through my 20s. And then, when I was in college, I kind of I gained a better understanding of the philosophical tradition that religion has, and kind of the history of really rigorous logic and rationality that a lot of religious faiths have as part of their heritage. And that kind of opened my mind a little bit and kind of, gave me pause as to the way I was writing off entire, swaths of the human population as being weak-minded. So I kind of lived with that for a while. And then about 2 years ago, I think it was early 2021, I started getting really into Buddhism. And Buddhism was something that had interested me since I was a teenager. But I really kind of decided to give it a trial run, I suppose. Like, I developed a daily meditation practice. I really started reading a lot of Buddhist teachings and literature. And something really interesting happened. I started to, I ended up in a really bad place. Like, I started having panic attacks frequently,
Oh,
pretty debilitating ones. There was a number of factors going on with that. I think what I eventually came to realize with the help of some others was my life was not in a place I was happy with, and I needed to make some really dramatic changes. And I started doing that. And one of those changes I realized was that I needed to. There was a certain part of me that was unfulfilled, and it was a religious part. So I guess I would say I was a religious person without a religion, if that makes sense. Like, I had that impulse, I had that inclination, and I always had, but it wasn't something that I had any kind of. I didn't have I was not brought up with a tradition in which I could express that, or I couldn't formulate it properly because I didn't have the vocabulary, because it wasn't something I had really ever been exposed to or exposed myself to, if that makes sense. And kind of one of the reasons I came to that realization is because I have always had a really strong conviction that morality is an objective truth. Which is not to say that I know what's right in all cases. I certainly don't, but I have always felt, as long as I can remember, that the idea that morality is subjective is just incoherent and nonsensical. It seems self-evident to me that that is not the case. And what I came to realize was that's a religious conviction, right? Because there are attempts to reconcile atheism with moral realism. And a lot of intelligent people are able to mesh those together. I don't see it as a very tenable position personally. It doesn't make sense to me. I feel like if you're a moral realist, then it has to come from above in some sense. And that was another reason why I felt like Buddhism failed for me to satisfy those convictions, because Buddhism, in my limited understanding of it, I do still think it's an enormously wise body of beliefs, really some of the most wise teachings in history, I think. But it's a kind of wisdom of negation, right? It's an atheistic religion. I would consider it a nihilistic religion, because it's all about negating any sense of meaning or any sense of transcendence in the typical sense. Like, I think a Buddhist would probably disagree with that to a certain extent, but for me, it didn't satisfy, or it didn't address what I thought was a truth, which is that there is something higher, there is something transcendent, and that's where some of these moral convictions or moral realities come from, among other things. If that makes any sense at all. I feel like I might be going long here, but
no, you're being very clear. So, and I know you as a very intellectually inclined person, so there is a lot that speaks to you in your life, but inner life, that comes from books, from philosophers, from theologians. Was there any particular reading experience or a book that created this maybe shift from the tentatives that you were making with Buddhism to the Christian Orthodox Church?
Yeah, it was a series of things, really, and it kind of coincided appropriately enough with BookTube, right? Because maybe Midrash happened shortly after I started having these thoughts. And that, I think, was the year that you and I and Dario read Augustine's Confessions, which had a profound impact on me. And I just really started thinking of religion not so much as an area of interest, which it always had been for me, but as something that I wanted, like something that not even that I wanted, but that I felt I was inclined towards naturally. And so I did a lot of reading of various religious texts. I read the Bhagavad Gita, I read the Quran, I read the Bible, and I was continuing to read Buddhist teachings and writings, and then eventually I found my way to the Baha'i faith, actually, and I read some Baha'i sacred.
Oh wow!
Yeah, and I actually got pretty involved with the Baha'i community here in my local area, and I was kind of edging towards a conversion even. But again, I felt like something was kind of missing, and I felt like Baha'i is such a recent faith. It doesn't have much tradition, and also one of the tenets of the faith is it's a little antithetical tradition to tradition. It kind of tries to avoid that kind of thing. And again, I do think that there's a lot of beauty and wisdom in Baha'i as well. But again, it felt like it fell short for me a little bit. And then, I was having these thoughts of, a true religious life isn't about shopping for religions. You know what I mean? You need to pick something and really commit to it. So I had these doubts, like, why am I waffling so much with this? But then, I started thinking about Dostoevsky, who had been, a very grounding force in not only my reading life, but my life for, a decade prior. The way he talked about faith and spirituality and God and living with God had always had a profound impact on me. And I kind of, now that I was more open to the idea of thinking of myself as a religious person, I was more open to reading Dostoevsky in a new light, if that makes sense, and kind of coming back to those feelings that he inspired in me with this kind of newfound yearning. And then, of course, I was aware that Dostoevsky was an Orthodox Christian, and I was aware that that played a massive role in his outlook and what he wrote about. So honestly, it was basically on a whim. One day I just Googled Orthodox Christian churches in Portland, and the first one that came up, I decided to go to their Divine Liturgy one Sunday. And liturgy is the central service in Orthodoxy. The Eucharist, it's built around the Eucharist. It can be served anytime, anywhere, but it's generally served on Sundays. So I went to the Divine Liturgy one Sunday, and it wasn't like this epiphany, instant conversion moment at all. It's kind of boring in that sense, but I was really struck by just the power of the liturgy, right? Because the few times I had been to Christian religious services, it had been very Protestant, which is not very much about spectacle or ritual. And then the liturgy is just so, it's so ritualized, it's so symbolic, it's so beautiful, it's so kind of solemn. And you really get the sense that everyone, the congregation and the priest and the deacon and the choir, they all feel that they are in the presence of something sacred. And that feeling is contagious. So like I said, it wasn't like I was instantly like, oh, okay, I'm Orthodox now. But what it did was it instilled in me the inclination to make a habit of it, I guess. So I kept going. I kept going and I kept going. And then I started going to other services. I started going to Vespers and Matins. And then I started going to the Inquirer's class, which is just a class that the priest runs in order to instruct people who are curious about the faith. And it just became, it just kind of became part of my life consciously, not even really consciously. It just kind of, I fell into it. And I still wasn't really thinking of it as something like, oh, I'm definitely doing this. But then one day my priest asked me, he's like, okay, do you want to do this? Do you want to be baptized? And then when he asked me, I was like, what kind of question is that? Of course I do. Like at that moment I realized, oh yeah, this is the direction I'm going and it feels right. And I was officially baptized on Holy Saturday about 6 weeks ago now.
Oh my God, congratulations. That's fantastic. I didn't know it was so recent. That's really fantastic, really fantastic. It's not a boring story at all, at least to me. It's a very, very exciting story. It's interesting because it sounds like the intellectual part of this spiritual journey of yours was only up, even if it was very important. It was only a part. It was not just there. It seems to me like you were very attracted by, on one hand, the massive literary and theological richness of the faith, but then on the other side, also the physical expression of it, right? In terms of the liturgy, the probably the architecture itself, and all the tradition kind of speaking out through the walls of the church and the words of the liturgy and all that, right?
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. It is a deeply comprehensive experience. It incorporates everything, not only the intellect that's there, but also even just it incorporates all five senses, right? Because you have the smell of the incense, you have the taste of the Eucharist, you have the touch of crossing yourself and kissing the icons. And then you have the spectacle of what you're looking at and looking at the icons and looking at the service. It really is. It's like it's an art, but it's above art because it incorporates all of that. And then on top of that, you have the entire tradition of the church, which is just this endless this endless ocean of beauty and of wisdom, and of comfort and of mystery. So just the depth of it was it was almost like a sense of vertigo. You know what I mean? Looking down into that depth of history and of tradition, and of mystery, was a very powerful experience. And again, it didn't come over me all in a flash, but I caught glimpses of it, and then I kind of slowly found myself immersing myself into it, and that's kind of how it came about.
That's wonderful. Are you brushing up on your Latin in these days?
No, no, no. It's not so Latin. Orthodox, I think, tends to be more Greek rather than Latin. I think Latin is more of a Catholic thing, as I understand it. So not a whole lot of Latin involved.
So, and this is obviously my ignorance here. What in the typical, let's call it Sunday Mass that you go to, what's the main language used during that Mass?
It's generally English, but it is a Russian Orthodox church, so some parts of it are in Russian. So in Orthodoxy, there's regional differences. So there's like the Slavic tradition, and then there's the Greek tradition, and then there's more Eastern traditions like Coptic and things like that. But it's all Orthodoxy, and they're all in communion with each other. I think there's maybe a couple outliers, but so there's a fair amount of variety, but there's also a fair amount of consistency. Like I have also gone to Greek Orthodox churches, and it's not like I'm a fish out of water. It's essentially the same. There's just a little more Greek.
So in the interest of information for me that I'm not too familiar, is every Russian Orthodox church in the US, for example, let's say reporting or maybe led by the Russian Patriarch, and every Greek Orthodox church led by the Greek Patriarch, or is it more complex than that?
It is unfortunately more complex than that in America. We have what's called the Orthodox Church of America, the OCA, and they have their own kind of hierarchy and bishops and whatnot. So my parish is under that, but there are also Orthodox churches in America that are answerable to the Moscow Patriarch. So it's a little messy here in America. And again, I'm not an expert at all. Like it's such a complex tradition, and I'm going to spend my entire life understanding it. But as I understand it, that's kind of where it stands, if that makes sense.
It does. It does. No, thanks for clarifying that. So another question for you: in your day-to-day life, you go about your job and get out of your home and interact with people. How many people in Portland, is where you live today, how many people do you feel like you can be open about your faith, and or not? What's your experience there?
That's a really good question, and it's something I have thought about, and I find myself uncomfortable thinking about, or uncomfortable because I guess the answer is there's not many people I feel comfortable bringing it up with. And I think that's partly my fault, because of my background of looking down on religion. There is a part of me that feels like not ashamed, but like people are going to feel that way about me. And it's my own pride that's getting in the way of that. But also I do think that, we live in a very secular world, and I especially because Orthodoxy is so foreign to a lot of Westerners, um, and because it's so complex, I don't feel like it's something I can explain quickly. So I tend to not bring it up. If it's not like I would ever deny it if someone asked, but it's not something I bring up often, and it's something I don't want to say embarrassed, but I haven't yet found a way to harmonize my day-to-day life among secular people with my spiritual life within the church. That being said, I also have many Orthodox friends now, and certainly around them, I can have great, enriching conversations about religion. But there's a disconnect for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Now, thanks for sharing that. Any particular, now, of course, you're busy with your job, and so I understand also maybe reading a little less, but any particular Orthodox author or theologian that stands out for you and you would feel like recommending?
Yeah, there's a few. Right now, I'm reading Pseudo Dionysius, who was a 5th century writer. His name obviously wasn't actually Dionysius, but so Orthodoxy has a tremendous wealth of what they call the Church Fathers, who were early writers within the Church. There's a great collection called the Philokalia, which is just a collection of writings from some of these Church Fathers. So I would certainly recommend looking into that if anyone's curious. I'm also a big fan of Saint Ephrem, who was a poet. He did some really beautiful Orthodox poetry, one called Hymns on Paradise, which I recently read, which was really beautiful. And then Saint Maximus the Confessor is one of my favorites as well.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So I've only scratched the surface, but there have been a number already that have had an impact on me. So
I just feel like Christians in general, from Protestant to Catholic to Orthodox, should make an effort. We all should make an effort to go back as much as possible to these great fathers of the church, the ancient ones, like you're saying, 4th century, 5th century, or even earlier, a little bit later. It's that kind of common root. And then one could argue that there is much more overlap between maybe Catholicism and Orthodox Christianity rather than Protestantism, or at least you could say that there are some more radical differences between Catholicism and Protestantism rather than between Catholicism and Orthodox Christianity. At least that's my vague understanding, right?
yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Not to denigrate Protestantism at all, but I do feel like both Catholicism and Orthodoxy, for one, we have the tradition of the church, right, which is very much downplayed in most Protestant faiths. And so I think as a result, they lose that reverence for the church fathers. They kind of, not to say that Protestants don't read the church fathers, but it's not so much a part of their daily life within the church as it might be for a Catholic or an Orthodox Christian, which I think is a loss personally.
Yeah, I mean, that's maybe so. At the same time, back to the point you were making earlier about the reality of living in today's secular world, maybe never in history we've felt so much of a pull or maybe a need to find our common ground, to unite the huge Christian umbrella, in a sense, almost against our common enemy, because the common enemy at this point is so strong in the world. And a quick example, I found myself on a flight next to a Muslim woman a few weeks ago, and this Muslim, we happened to talk about marriage. She was going to move to the place where her husband lives, I think in Virginia. And she asked me, because she was a little younger, she asked me, what's the secret for a successful marriage? as if she had found who. I don't know who she thought she was talking to, but I said, hey, obviously I don't have any secret, but what I felt like doing, I quoted Fulton Sheen, who is in the Catholic Church, was one of the greatest communicators in the 20th century, and he said, you need 3 people for a marriage to really be successful. You need you, your spouse, and God. This is the main ingredients if you really want to build something that is solid, strong, and long lasting. Um, and surprisingly, to this point, she said, "Oh, maybe not surprisingly, in fact, not surprising at all." She said, "Oh, that sentence, there is exactly the sentence in the Quran itself." So we were, as a Catholic and a Muslim, on a plane, um, finding so much common ground between us, when most likely, if you had to survey all the people on that plane, the majority of them would not be faithful, would be secular or atheist or materialistic, which is interesting.
Yeah, it is. And I really like your point that that gives us a common ground across faiths, right? Because the real enemy, and I hesitate to use the word enemy, that seems a little extreme, but I think that there is a problem when there isn't a sense of the transcendent, whatever that may be in your life, right? Because what that ultimately leads you to is, if not nihilism, then a worship of the human being, which is just not helpful. That leads to some pretty ugly things, right? So, kind of subjugating yourself to a tradition that is larger than yourself and to an idea that is larger than yourself is very antithetical to modern people, I think.
Yeah,
But it is. I believe it is essential to living a true life. And again, I'm not going to pretend that I have the only way to truth, but I do believe that some kind of tradition, some kind of submission to that tradition is essential, and that
yeah,
without that, we end up in some really dark places
yeah. I
as
agree.
people and as individuals.
I agree. And also, I agree that enemy is a strong word in our modern society, for sure. That reminds us of some kind of extremism. Um, I also believe that it probably is a word that we should refresh, in the sense that we are here as Christians, called to love everybody, to love our brothers and sisters. It does not matter in what point of their spiritual journey they are. They could be as far from a relationship with God as possible. They still 100% deserve our love. Love is at the center. But at the same time, when it comes to the ideology or philosophy or the existential approach, I think there is an enmity there that we have to recognize. I, when I tell myself that needs to be an enemy, because there is an enemy, which is the devil. And if it wasn't as clear, everything else would not be as clear in my, let's say, mental experience.
Right. Yeah, I like that. Yeah. The enemy is not the person, but the enemy can be the attitude and the outlook and the philosophy. I
Right.
agree with that for sure.
Now, what do you on maybe partially on this point? What do you think of when it comes to the scriptures? You mentioned you read the Bible, you read the Quran as well. What do you think, or what do you make of a very literal reading and approach to the scriptures, and that might be, taking the word almost as a scientific equation, and this is not. When it comes to Protestant Christianity, there's different approaches there. Maybe the evangelical one, the way I understand it, tends to be more literal, but I admit I'm really not as knowledgeable about it. So my question is general and not referring to any type of denomination. What do you think about the type of approach?
I think it's pretty unsupportable on numerous grounds. Like, even if you look at it historically, if you read the church fathers, almost none of them are talking about the scripture as something to be read literally. Like, it's just not something that comes up. It's not something that occurs to them. It seems like a relatively recent approach. And it's, again, I think of it as a huge, tremendous loss, because if you read the scriptures literally, that closes off the all of the various beautiful branchings out that can come from a more open reading of those texts, and not even just the Bible, but the Quran too, or any religious text. If you really look at it as just a very strict manual, I guess that's a cheapening of what it is, and it's also, come to think of it, kind of a manifestation of a secular mindset where everything has to have an industrial purpose. I will find the answer in here, and it will be laid out, and there's my answer, and that's that. It leaves no room for mystery, and it leaves no room for awe or any sense of the transcendent or of the greater than, I guess the transcendent. I already said it. It leaves no sense for that, which I think it's a huge loss, and it also is going to lead to some ugliness, because there are violent passages in a lot of these texts that I don't think are meant to be read as recommendations at all. And not only that, it's going to do violence to your mind and to your soul, because you're going to have to constantly be at war with the fact that if you read these things literally, they don't make sense. They just don't. And so you're going to be constantly fighting against that truth. So suffice it to say, I'm not a fan or a supporter of literal interpretations of Scripture.
Yeah, I love the way you articulated that. That's what I think as well. Final question, Jordan. Any, let's say, special memory from your baptism experience that you'd like to share?
Sure, yeah. So I was enormously nervous for the baptism because I'm a very shy person. I'm a very introverted person, and I had to, stand up there. It was full immersion, triple full immersion. I was fully immersed 3 times.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and I was standing up there, basically half naked in front of my entire congregation. And it was stressful, but it was a really beautiful thing. And the real beauty of it came actually later in the day, after the service, after I had gone home, after I had received my first ever communion. And I smelled the oil on me, because the water that I was baptized in was anointed with oil. And I smelled it on me, and I could still kind of taste the Eucharist. And I felt like my body was a holy object, kind of. And it was just a really powerful feeling, and unlike anything I had ever felt before. So I guess it's kind of a typical introvert answer. I felt it most after I was home and away from everything, but
and could process it all. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's wonderful. It's really wonderful to be able to go through such an important rite with your full adult mind and heart, right? Instead of when you're this big and they just plunge you in and that's done with. That's what happened to me many years ago. I'm so grateful for this chat, Jordan. Thank you very, very much for being willing to and open to share such recent memories as well. And all the best. God bless you for the continuing of your journey.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was great to talk to you about it. And I'm really looking forward to seeing where the channel goes from here. I'm already a huge fan.
Thank you. Thanks so much.